Hello and welcome to Production Bytes. I'm your host, Veranova, and today what I'm going to be doing is taking you through some intermediate skills for using compression. This is following on from my first compression tutorial, so if you haven't seen that and you want to learn about compression from scratch, go watch that first and then come back to this video. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the same project as in the first compression tutorial, but this time I'm not going to be using the fruity limiter as the compressor. Instead, this time I'm using a plugin called Flattery. Now this is a free plugin which you can go download, and I'll put a link in the underbar. And the main theme that I want to kind of hammer home in this tutorial is to use your eyes a lot less than I maybe taught you to in the first compression tutorial. In the first tutorial I was aiming at beginners, so these are people who didn't necessarily know how to use their ears at all, and they needed that extra visual feedback because maybe they didn't even understand what compression was before coming to see that video. However, this time round, I'm expecting you to already kind of know what compression does and how it works, so I'm going to start talking about some more listening skills and some more advanced functions of compressors. So, first off, I'm going to quickly take you through Flattery. As you'd expect in a compressor, you've got a threshold, your makeup gain, your attack, and your release settings. However, you'll be noticing that the ratio is missing. Now most compressors do have ratios, however there are some, such as this one, which use slightly different systems for achieving compression. In the case of this one, it has a fixed ratio, however it's what's called a soft knee ratio, so that means it slowly ramps on the harder you're pushing the audio into the ratio. And in the case of this compressor, the harder you push in the audio, the harder it compresses the peak, and it eventually will hit a limiting stage. And soft knee controls are controls which you find on a lot of compressors, although it's not on this one. In fact, if I go back to the fruity limiter now, you'll see there is actually a knee control right below the threshold and the ratio. And if I drag down the threshold a bit, and turn up the ratio, you'll see just around here that the ratio is pushing down, whereas if you just got it set to 0, it's a linear curve. But ratio of 2 to 1, it's about halfway down. What a knee does is it smooths out the joint between the threshold and the ratio, and in the case of fruity limiter, it also continues to curb the ratio itself. And this is also a lot more visible if I set my ratio to 0. So you can see now that it's curbing. Now this itself is very similar to what Flattery does, however it continues to curb over until it gets completely flat, which is the limiting stage. Soft knee is pretty useful for getting a slightly different sound from a compressor. It's also used a lot on audio like vocals, and it's used a lot on audio which needs to sound pretty natural. But with anything, and following the theme of this tutorial, I don't want to give you too many rules on that. I'd just say you need to use your ears and turn on the soft knee if you want to for a compressor. If it sounds good, leave it. The other major change you'll see is this, which is the gain reduction meter. Now this is a lot more common than seeing a waveform like you do in fruity limiter. And all it does is it tells you how hard you're compressing the audio above the threshold. So if you're taking 3 decibels off the peak of the audio, the gain reduction meter will show 3 decibels of gain reduction. The last thing that Flattery does, which a lot of compressors don't, is it has the ability to switch between peak and Rms compression. Now all this means is if you're in peak compression, you have your attack and release controls, and it sees the audio as it is, so it will compress the louder spikes in the audio. However, if you set it to Rms compression, what it does is it averages the signal over a set period of time. This period of time is selectable in some compressors, however it doesn't seem to be selectable in this one. In fact, it may be based on the attack and release settings. So Rms compression can be pretty good if you're trying to get a really pumping drum sound, for instance, since because it's averaging the signal, it doesn't quite pick up the transients of the drums. So you can make yourself a really fat, crushed sound but keep the transient detail in. You could achieve a very similar effect by using peak compression and turning up your attack, but again, use your ears. It does sometimes sound better using peak and a slow attack, but it definitely does sound a bit more crushed up if you're using RMS and a faster attack. However, it's all down to personal taste, so use your ears. So, without further ado, let's have a listen to this track.
At the dawn journey's end, we'll all go down in style as our gates are torn by tidal waves. Monteurs will mind the towers as Pandora's box draws close. We will go down with a fight, and when it is all over, we will hold on through the night.
So, as you can hear, it's quite dynamic, and there are a few sections of this audio which are getting lost, especially at the end here, and a few sections which are quite loud and you can still hear them quite clearly. However, what you want is a really consistent vocal dynamic, so that's where this compressor comes in. So the first thing to do when you're using a compressor which has a gain reduction meter is to set your ratio a little bit up. 2:1 is normally a good place to start, but that's not a rule. And then just turn down your threshold until it sounds a lot more consistent. However, if you're using this compressor, it doesn't have a ratio, so you don't need to worry about that and you can just go straight onto the threshold. You'll see I've reset the compressor now to its default settings, and I'm doing this in peak mode. So let's get started.
At the dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in style as our gates are torn by tidal waves. Monteurs will mind the towers as Pandora's box draws close. We will go down with a fight, and when it is all over, we will hold on through the night. At the dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in style as our gates are torn by tidal waves. Monteurs will mind the towers as Pandora's box draws close. We will go down with a fight, and when it is all over, with a fight, 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 and when it is all over, we will hold on through the night.
So there we go. I've got my threshold now at about -28 dB, which if I was using a compressor which had a standard ratio, might be quite a lot. However, because this ratio slowly ramps on, I need it to be a little bit deeper so that the louder audio gets compressed a lot. So now I need to set my attack and release settings. Now again, you need to use your ears for this, but now I've got the threshold set so you can hear everything within the track, it might be useful to solo the vocals. And the attack and release settings, as I spoke about in the last tutorial, can be pretty subtle, but they become a lot less subtle when you set your threshold really, really low. So I'm just going to make a mental note that I've got it at -28 at the minute, and I'm going to set it all the way down, and then have a play with the attack and release settings until it sounds good. It's also worth noting at this point, the only reason I'm doing this is so it's more audible. However, if you can hear the difference when the threshold is set to the right amount, then you don't need to put it at such extreme settings when you're compressing yourself.
At the dawn of the journey's end, at the dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in.
As you can hear, the moment I turned the release down, it allowed the vocals to come through a lot more, whereas they were just being crushed constantly. So have a listen to that as I adjust the release.
At the dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in style as our gates are all go down in style.
If you have a listen to when Sean sings Style, you'll hear when the release is a little bit higher, it sounds like it's pumping a little bit. But then the moment I turn the release down, it comes to life again.
All go down in style. All go down in style. All go down in style. All go down in style.
It is very subtle and it's difficult for me to pick out as well, but if you have a look at this screenshot, the highlighted section on the left is with the release down, and the highlighted section on the right is with the release up. And you can see that with the release down, the waveform is a much bigger chunk, but with the release up, there is a slight dip just after the initial vocal, and then it rises up again towards the end, which is characteristic of a pump. So I think that's about where I want to set my release, and the attack is about right too. If you have a listen to the first two words here, you'll hear that when the attack is higher, they punch, and when the attack is very low, they lose some of that punch. So somewhere about in the middle just allows them to be squashed a little bit, but also allows some of that life to come through. So now if I set my threshold back to about 28 where I originally had it, and play through the track, it should sound really good now, and I'll just adjust my gain as well so I get the levels right.
At the dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in style. As our gates are torn by tidal waves, monteurs will mind the towns. As Pandora's box draws close, we will go down with a fight. And when it is all over, we will hold on through the night.
So there we go. Like last time, I'm also going to go onto this drum loop now. And this is because I want to show you the difference between peak and RMS compression, and it is a lot more noticeable on transient material such as drums. So I'm going to load up Flattery, and let's have a listen to this loop. So same deal as last time, I'm going to set this to peak compression, and then I'm just going to turn down my threshold to squash the snare back into the mix a bit. Okay, so as you can hear, that's pretty squashed now. It still sounds pretty punchy as I have my attack up and my release down a little bit. But what if I switch this to RMS compression? So that means it will be compressing the average signal instead of compressing the peaks. So you can hear it just comes back to life, but it still sounds a little bit crushed on the sustained sections. So I'll switch this in and out, and you can just have a listen to that. And as you can hear, when the compressor's in, it sounds a lot punchier, it also sounds a lot fatter, but the transients have actually been reduced a little bit. So this works really well if you're going to put it on a drums bus, because it just allows you to glue together all of the tracks and make it sound a lot heavier. So that's it for this tutorial. If you fancy having a shot at doing this yourself, I'll put a link to the project in the underbar, and also the link to download Flattery will be up there. So thanks for watching, I hope this tutorial helped, and I'll see you next time on Production Bytes.
Dawn of the journey's end, we'll all go down in style as